I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists one by one. So we want to first say bonjour to Laurent Andrew Ruest. He is your friendly trans masc QA here to help you troubleshoot your issue. He's been in the industry for almost 5 years and has worked on live projects for 3.5 of those years. And fun fact about Laurent is that he has a strong artistic side to him and comes from a small rural town in Quebec. Next up, we got Raquel Maestre, who's a localization QA lead based in Montreal with 6 years of experience in making sure that when games are translated to other languages, they are as bug-free as in the original language. Hi, Raquel. And lastly, we've got Lenny Gingello, who's a senior QA tester at Proletariat Inc., where he worked on testing, test planning, and test coordination for Spellbreak, which you may have heard of. It did release in September 2020, and his educational background is a BS in game design from Champlain College. Lenny is a lover of most nerd culture type things, as well as cooking, music, and tech. Fun fact about Lenny and I, we went to college together. So it's nice to see you again. So I'm really excited to chat with you all. And even though one of my colleagues works in QA, I still feel like I don't know much about what goes on in QA and what your day-to-day tasks are. So I was hoping that you could all share that. And maybe we can start with Laurent. So what do you do at work and what are your day-to-day tasks?
Hello, bonjour. So my day-to-day task is to break it down so that everyone around here can understand. Can sound a bit like playing the video game. But in itself, it's a lot more assuring that points A gets to point B, to really break it down what really QA like is in itself. So I make sure the audio works. I make sure that's the proper art. I can make sure that the character moves as it should be if I'm like pushing the controller around and moving around the map. But it can also be a bit more on what the player doesn't see. So if we're talking about, let's say, an online game or something that has like transaction, like monetary transaction or anything like that, then that's more server side. Anything on the back end that we usually call it. So if like you make you buy like a skin for a video game, like a mobile game, let's say, and then you're paying like $2 for that skin. So we want to make sure that like the $2 probably gets taken from your account, and like nothing happens because we don't want people to, of course, to lose money. So yeah, it's you really touch everything, honestly, in QA. You can be surprised of how much you can learn. It's pretty much that. Like you really touch everything on QA. That's pretty much that's it. That's the best way to say it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that definitely like helps sum it up too. Raquel, did you want to share about what you do at work?
Sure. So I am a localization QA lead, and maybe first I will explain a little bit what localization and localization QA is. Localization would be not just the translation of video games, but also making sure that the games are culturally adapted to the different markets. Like there might be, like, let's imagine a joke in English referencing something. It could be translated literally to other languages, but the references wouldn't be understood. So localization includes not just the translation, but making sure that everything is understood and appropriate for the different cultures. And localization QA is the aspect of game QA that is related to that, and it involves a lot of different things as well. We also test the games. We also have to check every aspect of the game, just like regular QA, but paying lots of attention to the linguistic side. When a game is translated to another language, that can cause a lot of problems with the UI, or maybe, yes, Amila.
Yes, I know. Every time I make UI, everyone's just like if it's like getting close to the edges, they're like, just think about it in German. And I'm like, you're right. I need to make
Yes.
more space.
Mm-hmm. But other times there's just problems with, the English text or the way the game is written, because a lot of languages are gendered, for example, and if the character can be of different genders and the text isn't able to reflect that, doesn't use variables to adapt, etc., it can cause a lot of problems. So my branch of QA takes care of all of that. And as a LQA lead, as a localization QA lead, my day-to-day, well, it's basically catching up with like 90 different Slack channels. And no, but seriously, as a lead, my main job is to be like a point of connection between the testers and the project managers, the developers. I start the morning. I make sure I check the emails, check Jira, the database, to make sure that, to compile all the requests that we might have, all the tasks that we have to do, and give them and explain them to the testers. And yeah, making time for everything we're asked for, trying to fit the pieces of the puzzle. And yeah, I could go on more detail, but maybe for now that's enough. Like, and yeah, and being a localization QA, there can be like very like tasks that are very much QA and or certification testing, etc. And sometimes it's tasks that are revising translations, proofreading translations directly. It's a bit of everything.
Yeah. Wow. I think one thing I never thought about for localization is doing think about the culture, like which the language and the culture it's being translated to, because you're totally right about some jokes. You can't translate it. You have to maybe rewrite the jokes entirely. Yeah. So Lenny, I'd love to hear from you what you do at work.
Yeah, so primarily right now I work with sort of the backend services team at Proletariat. So my day-to-day is typically just checking in with each one of the engineers that I work with, seeing how their work has progressed, seeing do they need me to test something specific. And like everybody's been saying, it can really be all over the place. So one day I'm testing, something related to UI, and then the next day I'm testing something, related to like connections to servers and stuff like that. So it really varies, but the very consistent thing is that I'm checking in with the members of my team, seeing if they need support from me. And if they do have stuff for me to test, then I get into writing test cases and test plans for the stuff that I need to test if it warrants that, or if they don't have anything for me to test. It's either communicating with other members of the QA team to make sure that any bits of pieces of relevant things that I'm working on to see if it's relevant to them and whether or not they need to be kept up to date about things that are changing with the software at any given time, or just writing documentation to make sure that processes that only I know about are visible to the rest of the team.
Yeah, that documentation thing is so important, because I remember at work, I've been to a couple like QA test plan meetings, and they have this giant spreadsheet in ways that I didn't know you could use spreadsheets. And like one line by line, they just go through everything that they're going to test. And it's like, you really see how much work goes into just testing a feature like let alone an entire game. It's crazy. One common thing I noticed, like when all of you were speaking, is that it sounded like there's a lot of collaboration happening with other teams. So is there ever like any crossover? Do you mainly just test other areas of the game like art or like the monetary transactions? Or do you also work in other disciplines? Like would you work with an art team, for example, or with a programming team to fix something?
I can start and yeah, like in LQA, for example, we collaborate a lot with different teams. First of all, like with the translation team, it's like constant communication. Like there's so much that they like we ask each other, and it's like constant communication, but also with the different QA teams. If functionality QA finds something in another language, they will send it to us, so we investigate it. If we find a functionality bug, we send it to QA. We ask each other a lot. Same with the certification teams. When there's a lot of communication, and it's a very important part of the job, collaborating and communicating and being synced up. So yeah, for LQA, it's very important.
For us as well, if I could chime in, for us as well, it's very important. We tend to embed our QA folks on their individual teams, so that can sort of lead to sort of siloing of the individual members. And one of the things that I think we've done very well at Proletariat is ensuring that there are always open streams of communication, and you know, we're sort of a small team, so there is a lot of opportunity to say, oh, one person needs help, you know, somebody on the art team QA needs help. I have some free time, so I'm just going to walk over there, or not walk because we're not in the office anymore, but I'm gonna you know, go over there to help them. So there is a lot of collaboration going on. I would say like most of my job is actually like collaborating and communicating with other members of my team to make sure that things are being handled appropriately. It's like all the time, constant, just chatting with other folks.
Laurent, is there anything you wanted to add to this?
Absolutely. To continue into this, like both Raquel and Lenny said, it is very much a lot of communication, and especially a lot of teamwork, considering you know, you work with programming, you work with not in every studio, but you, depending on like how much like you can work with the programmers and the developers and the artists and the riggers, and it's really like a whole like spider web of communication in QA as well. Like in itself, I'm personally, I'm someone that loves learning, so like that's why I've been in QA like at least for 5 years, and maybe for still a couple of years to go over, if unless I have other plans. But no, yeah, it's a very intricate it's an intricate job for communication, and but I like when it goes well, it's very fun, like for personally, as I find fun in learning, and like QA, because it touches it really like you have the possibility of touching a lot of subjects within the game itself. And so that's what I find really fascinating, and that's why I like yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. From my experience with working with people in QA, like what I love is like when I'm working on a feature and there's a certain design, and then when the QA team tests it, they like put themselves in the player's shoes, and they'll give like user experience feedback. Like they would say, oh, I don't think this would be good for the player because of so and so reason. And it's feedback nobody had before. And so it's like so nice to also have their like collaborating with them on making the design like the best player experience that it can be. We do have a question from the chat. So the question is, how does QA change over the lifetime of a project? Do you ever test games at a very early stage?
I think as someone who have worked like on a live project that wouldn't like, it wasn't expected for it to like, I mean, anyone wants its game to be popular, but like they didn't expect like as much as popularity as the game. Like and especially for like 3+5 years, like there's a lot of thing that goes, especially for like online play, as much as it's popular. And like seeing stuff that they started talking about, like that they were like, oh, let's see if the game is very popular, and like in 3 years we're still working on it. What kind of things would we be expecting? And so like it's like kind of like a child imagination, like to with who we work. And it's real just, okay, what kind of like, if we started with this, what would be like in like the history of the game, what would be logical in 3 years for this with like our lore and our characters. It's fascinating to see. It's very fun to see. And then like if it, like in our case, since it did happen, it was a lot of work because our project, I'm not on it, like it's not something I'm working on anymore. I'm the project itself, like we started like with a team of 14 tester over for like one shift, and then it became a 7-day project with like a team of like 300 test lead, and like it became very, very big for like,
wow, yeah, like it
it exploded quite literally. But yeah, you really like, I wasn't expecting this when I started QA, because like it was it was like my first, I just started a new job. And I was like very much looking like, okay, I need something that just like needs to hire me right now. 5 years ago, and I was like, okay, well, this QA studio is hiring, let's go. I'm just gonna, and I was lucky. They hired me. I was like very, they hired me. I got put on a project like a week later, and like 6 months later, I was permanent. So, you know, very like right place, right moment.
Yeah.
It's like, but then I also work, like I did a lot of overtime on some other project, and you know, in like a span of 6 months, a game can vary, even if it's just like 1 month or like 6 months, a game can very much evolve.
Yeah, with like what's needed for it.
Yeah.
Raquel and Lenny, did you have anything else you want to add on like how QA changes over the lifetime of a project, and do you test games at a very early stage?
Yes. In my case, like for LQA, not always, but often it's done through third-party vendors, right? There's not that many positions that are like in-house with developers. When that's the case, often developers will only hire LQA teams when the games are ready to be tested, like the few months before release. So it's more common to test the games when they are, you know, much more developed. But I have had the chance to test games at early stages, and when that's the case for localization, what we do instead of localization QA, it's more like what it's called internationalization passes, where it's just like general swipes of looking for like basic UI issues that could happen, like the Chinese fonts are not implemented, or there's gonna be these clear UI problems here and there, even though like maybe like a lot of the content isn't ready, a lot of the text isn't ready, but we can still find issues in advance. So it's it begins from like very vague quick swipes, and then things started to get formed, get implemented, and you just start to pay more attention to everything. That's kind of neat.
Nice. And Lenny, I know you mentioned that you worked on Spellbreak. So were you working on it when it was like developing in early stages as QA? Like, what was the QA experience like for you there?
Yeah, so I came onto Spellbreak sort of after I think it had all of its its game like sort of creation and idea generating after that process had mostly been completed. So I was hired at the end of 2019 or October 2019, and Spellbreak launched in September of 2020. But the overall pace of just development between the period in which I was hired and the game launching, and then the subsequent months and releases after that, was like almost what I would describe as like sort of like a roller coaster ride. There were times of like this intense sort of like development cycle in order to hit milestones, and stuff like that. And something that we wanted to fight for, and something that we really wanted to encourage, was getting QA into the decision-making process as early as possible. And I think it was definitely a process that took a long time, but we eventually reached the point where when a new initiative or a new feature was coming online, there was a QA person in there who was able to advocate for QA's interests and stuff like that. So while I'm not able to speak to sort of like the pre-production and early production phases of Spellbreak, we are sort of setting up ways in the future to where QA is an integral part of each of those process steps, so that we can, even provide, like what somebody was saying earlier, like user experience feedback for very early designs, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have another question from the Q&A. What are some common misconceptions about QA that you would like to address? Raquel, do you want to go first? Or if you need some time, we can come back.
No, I can go first.
Okay.
I think that sometimes when a game is released and it's full of bugs, for example, and the public might assume at some point that testers were not properly doing their job. They will, they're playing the game, they see like very obvious bugs, and they will think that that was the tester's fault. And I would like if that misconception was like cleared up, because it often has to do with the scoping of the projects, how much resources have been spent on QA, what kind of timelines they were given, making sure a game is in good state and free of bugs requires a big effort in QA. When we're talking about AAA games, it's not something that can be done just easily by 3 people in a week. And sometimes even though the QA testers are finding the bugs, they're reporting all the issues, there are milestones, there are deadlines, there's dates for release that are not flexible, and that is often the real reason why sometimes games come out in a state that is far from ideal.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a lot of misconceptions just about also the game industry in general and how games are made. It's not like you push a button and it works. I think you're totally right, touching up on the topics of like there are deadlines and milestones that need to be met. There are certain goals that need to be met. And sometimes once those goals are met, if there's anything extra, but we're out of time, like too bad, sort of. Yeah. Lenny or Laurent, did you want to add anything else about misconceptions about QA?
I think for me, Raquel, you really hit it on the head. Like that is the biggest misconception for me, is that like, oh, when a game releases and it's in like a semi-buggy state, people have this weird assumption that it's QA's fault for not finding the issue. Whereas like in most times, if there is like a glaring issue with the game, QA knew about it, but other circumstances forced it to sort of go out in that state. So yeah, I totally agree.
Laurent, you too, I see your head in agreement. Yeah.
I also agree. I have nothing else to add about this.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty good sum up. So speaking of like all the, like it sounds like QA has to kind of cover a lot. Sometimes there isn't enough time, sometimes there isn't enough team members. How do you navigate kind of like the stress and the pressure of trying to do your job, but also of trying to like get this game in the best state possible? Like, have you experienced crunch? Is that something you're going through or have gone through? Yeah, I guess just generally wondering what like the stress and pressure is like for those working in QA.
Indeed, I have experienced crunched, not too many times because I have a hard head. I put my feet on the ground and I say, no, I'm not going to do it. This is not like the concept of crunch is, I hate it. It's ridiculous. But fortunately, I have not experienced it too many times, let's say. But for me, scheduling as much as possible for real will kind of help get you like, okay, well, what I try to go like more than a day-to-day type of thing, because like there are some stuff like if I need to do a soak test of like 8 hours, that like either I'm gonna do that overnight or I'm gonna start at the beginning of my shift and wait at the end of the day. But like if I check what I have to do and what's ready to test, so like, okay, is there like for like I really go by priority. So first, like whatever's ready to test and like needs to get done right away, and like anything that's like main functionality for me. So like anything that like involves the controllers, the like functionality, if it's there's a blocker, a breaker, if it crashed, that like thing that I like get immediately off the way. After that, then it's like priority. Okay, well, what can I test? What do I have to test? What should I, kind of like what seems to be the most important to do right now, because, well, you're on a schedule, so it's that.
Yeah. Raquel or Lenny, anything you want to add about how to deal with the stress or pressure or just what goes on? What's it like?
I think Laurent, you said something that we started doing as well, is sort of planting your feet in the ground and saying, no, I will not crunch. Because a lot of the times, especially when you're coming up towards sort of the release of a product, the QA sort of release and exit passing, those are sort of the last step before either submitting something for certification or pushing it out to live. And so a lot of times you can feel a lot of pressure to get something either done quickly and not do as good of a job, or to crunch for it. And something that we were empowered by our managers to do as sort of after Spellbreak released and was in its subsequent releases was say what our estimates for testing were going to be, but also give us the ability to plant our feet in the ground and say, no, we are not going to crunch. And that's a tricky situation to navigate, right? Because not all studios are going to have the sort of culture that will allow that. It's either, sort of do it or, like there could be consequences. So to try to avoid all that kind of thing, having everybody on the team, not just the QA members, but the producers and the engineers and the artists and whoever's on the team, be upfront and very honest about how much work they can get done in an amount of time, and whether or not either the deadline or the amount of work needs to change. But yeah.
When it comes to crunch, I must say I have been lucky in my last years in QA, because I've worked for studios that didn't have crunch, and I'm grateful for that. But I completely agree with everything that Laurent and Lenny said, especially now with what Lenny said about being upfront and honest with expectations, and because at the end of the day, we are quality assurance. We're supposed to be delivering quality, and so even though I haven't been asked to do crunch, and I don't remember when it was the last time, my team has been asked at times to do a lot. We've been put a lot of pressure, working on different projects at the same time. And it was part of my job to be honest with the project managers and whoever it was necessary, to explain what is doable with the amount of time and the resources that we have, present the facts, and work out with them what to prioritize, what can really be done, instead of just saying yes to everything, because the development process sometimes can get everybody caught up in it, and there's like infinite things to do, and we have to prioritize, we have to choose.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I have another question in the Q&A, and this sort of ties into my last question that I really want to ask before we go. But so the title of this talk is like celebrating QA, the unsung heroes of the game industry. Personally, like from what I see from like on the player side, players do take out a lot of their like upsetness or aggression on QA on social media. I also know sometimes at work, perhaps QA team members may not be the most respected either. So this is kind of where I was going for with this panel. And the question is wondering, if QA are currently unrecognized, what should we do as an industry? What kind of positive changes would be required? I'll say it first. We need to pay QA more. Because that's a part, this is why I say it's a part two, because my second part of the question is about wondering, what does QA, like what should QA be paid? Because from my conversations with colleagues and from other people working in QA, they feel as though they are not paid enough. And so I guess I'd like to ask you all, like, what in your position, what should be the approximate range that someone in QA should be paid?
Fair wage, at least 40K. At the very, like 40K per year would be like, is like, enough to kind of like cover your basic and also like be comfortable. Like 40, like let's say 50, because I'm greedy, 50K. because
I think 50 is a good minimum. Yeah.
I just talk about experience because as someone that was also like a test lead for a good like 2 year 3 out of my 5. I after 1 year of being QA tester test lead, I was being paid 42K per year. And I was like, wow, I'm making money.
Yeah.
Like
And that's like as a lead, right?
As
a
a lead of a weekend a weekend team of like 40 like around 20 people ish, depending. Like on my highest period, I had like a total of 20 tester under me. So yeah, 50. Like pay tester 50K per year, please. Come on, that's
minimum.
Minimum.
Raquel or Lenny?
Yeah, so I did a little because I live in Boston, which is one of the most expensive cities to live in the United States. So I did a little bit of research a couple days ago about like concrete numbers about what folks in sort of my area is paid. So the range for a QA tester in Boston is between 21K, which gross.
Wow.
And yeah, that sucks.
In Boston.
In Boston, 21K to 116K, and that covers the seniority spectrum from junior QA tester, associate QA tester to QA lead or principal QA or whatever. But the MIT living wage calculator places a single person at a living wage in Boston at $19.17 an hour US, which is around 40K a year. But that is also predicated on the fact that somebody is spending like $200 for food on month, and their rent is 1.5K, which is impossible if you've ever tried to find a 1-bedroom or studio apartment in the Boston area and you don't want to live like an hour and a half outside the city. So I also did some numbers, and I was looking at the average salary for Boston associate programmers and associate artists and associate producers, and that range falls anywhere between 61K and 71K. So I think for starting out, I think they should really be in that range, starting from 61K to 71K. Because I started at 49K, and more than 60% of my income was going to my rent, and that was not sort of sustainable at all. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I think like just
ahead,
like a quick note. I said like 50K, but it's 50K Canadian. So like I guess it's probably around 60, 75K USD. But yeah.
And Raquel, did you have anything you wanted to add to this conversation?
As someone who's also in Canada, I think I agree with Laurent's figure. And yeah, like QA should be paid more, much more. This is a job that requires a lot of skills. These are positions that are crucial to the development and release of games. They're very important, and the amount of people in the amount of game devs that advance later on their career and started as QA shows like it's there's a lot of people in QA that are doing a very important job, very very skilled, and it should be recognized. I hear among testers often like this self-defeating or self-deprecating talk about like how they can be easily replaced, anyone can do their job, or etc. And sometimes some testers believe that, and that is completely wrong. It's false. We are not easily replaceable, especially experienced people, and they do like a really, 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 really important job for game development, and that should be recognized. That should be valued.
Dang, clapping. I got goosebumps when you said that. We are not easily replaced. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I do feel like sometimes that's how QA is looked at. And in some places, you can tell just by the pay and by the treatment of QA workers. So I wanted to add, so on top of so getting a higher salary and getting more recognition, is there anything else that our industry can do to, I guess, uplift QA more or to recognize QA more?
I think from just purely like a development process standpoint, one of the things that I saw introduce a lot of positive change was like fully embedding QA folks on respective pods for whatever they're testing, and pods, teams, like initiatives, whatever you want to call them. Having them having folks such as like, you know, like somebody who is leading a like you know, a sprint kickoff or something like that, sort of solicit opinions from the QA members on the team. That sort of stuff leads to sort of snowballing conversations, and then you'll find that folks come back to you for your opinions repeatedly, and that sort of raises the playing field that that folks are on. When QA folks are essentially put, I guess you would call it like another building, or they are kept you know, separate from the actual teams of people who are generating the work, you find that there's like this sort of othering of QA folks. So integrating them into the teams who are actually who are like creating the stuff that they're testing is something that I've seen create a lot of positive change and lead to like a greater feeling of mutual respect between not only the other team members in QA, but also QA for their other team members, because it really helps keep people on the same page and on the same level.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. At my studio, when I'm working on features, like after designers and programmers, like QA is like the next group of like the next team that I work a lot with. Because if it's like, if I can't reproduce a bug, I need the person who like found it to help me with it. And a lot of times like people from QA have amazing feedback on the way I laid out my UI. If it doesn't work well, something that other people haven't picked up on, they will. And so Lenny, I totally agree about not siloing teams and people, and to have more integration. I think that's definitely one way. So to recap, we've got more pay, right? Raise the salaries up a lot more, recognize the QA team more, and to also not silo and not other the QA team, include them and collaborate with them on the development of a project. I think that's pretty solid, and I feel like that should be doable for our industry. Like, you're not asking for much.
It's
You
not.
know?
It's like, wow, can you treat me with respect and dignity? And it's like, are you sure about that? Like, to quickly add to like a third point to your list, let's remove bro culture, please, from the gaming industry.
I just saw Lenny go, oh, yes.
Please. As a trans masc that look like your generic gamer surfer bro, I have heard too much disgusting shit. Let's cut it out. That's not okay.
yeah, we're all nodding in agreement. Like, I think everybody in this at this event, you know, is kind of tired of the bro culture in our industry. We got a lot of clapping in the chat. So we have to wrap up. We have about a minute before our 5-minute break. Any last words that anybody would like to say?
QA is fun.
QA is fun.
Yeah,
All right.
QA is fun.